You're watching Faith and Reason, a discussion about God, politics, and pop culture. From the perspective of our pastors, who are not afraid to tackle and ask the hard questions. A Christian talk show for those on a spiritual journey. This is Faith and Reason.
Good evening. Welcome to Faith and Reason, a show that looks at issues that are going on in today's society in light of the Word of God. I'm Pastor George Crespo from First Baptist Church in Cliffside Park. And with me, as always, Pastor Rick Spence from Fort Lee Gospel. Hello. Welcome. Tonight we want to tackle a different kind of topic, one that certainly Pastor Rick and I deal with on a much more common level than most people, but it's becoming something that people are more aware these days. And certainly with all the terrorist things happening, shootings, things that have been going on in society, people begin to fear the possibility that something may happen to them, that they may encounter, death in one way or another, or some sort of tragedy. Yet for us, of course, it's a very common thing because we do funerals. We're constantly exposed to the reality of life, that it ends in death. And yet most people walk around as if everything is fine, everything is dandy, there's no problem for them. And it's just very much of the matrix of their existence. And of course, we want to begin with this idea of are we really safe? Or is this just a great illusion? Where do we get this illusion from?
Well, I guess for the most part, you have a better chance of surviving the day than being killed every day you live, just because we live an awful lot of days in this life. And yet there's also the other side of it, is that people have a tendency to believe they're going to live forever. They're going to believe that nothing bad's going to happen to them. So it's a combination. I think sometimes we fear the wrong things. We're more afraid of terrorists than we are of a heart attack, as an example. But there's a 1,000 times better chance that you and I would die of a heart attack than us being killed by a terrorist. So we're afraid of the terrorists. We're afraid of the bombing at the airport when we have to travel somewhere. We're afraid of the plane going down. And meanwhile, we're not afraid of the things that we should be concerned about. We're not afraid of the many ways that people die all the time.
Well, maybe in part, as I'm sitting here, I'm thinking maybe part of the reason we're like that is because we're feeding this based upon what we're watching in the news. Oh, someone walks into a theater and shoots people and stuff. So we're thinking, right. Oh, we're going to go see a movie and we're afraid that I'm going to go see Finding Dory, and all of a sudden someone's going to gun me down. But you never hear in the news, John was eating peanut butter and jelly and he had a heart attack. And we don't hear that on the news.
While he's watching Dory in the theater.
We're not watching Dory. Yeah, while he was watching Dory, he got shot. But if he has a heart attack, we don't really hear about those things. Unless someone passed away, of course. Someone famous, of course, passed away. And then we, like Muhammad Ali or Eli Wiesel, who just passed away. Things like that, we might be exposed to that. But other than that, we really don't. So maybe it's because it's not a common thing that we're exposed to every day. Just like us, we're exposed to funerals, so we know. We know that a 15-year-old can die just as a 51-year-old can die. Right. And we have no illusion of that these things do happen. But yet, they do. Why do people in society, why is it that they avoid the thought of death, and how is it they're able to, again, persistently live every day without thought of it?
Well, I think if, there's a few ways you could answer that. On the one hand, if we're constantly thinking about our own death, we would become very depressed. We tend to not really live, or we would think we would be depressed if we thought about it. Although, from experience, a lot of funeral directors I've met have been full of life, and some of them have got a great sense of humor, and they're not depressed because they work for a funeral home. They deal with death every day. Every day they go to work, and there's a dead body or there's people grieving, and yet they're still filled with life. That's the first issue, and the second really plays into our territory, is that when you resolve your future, you resolve your life after death and how you understand that, and the Bible teaches a heaven and a hell, and if you wrestle with that and come to a place of peace and say, well, if I die, I'm in a better place, then it allows you to think more openly about it as well. That's another side of it.
And again, even though they may be exposed to it in some ways, I mean, we were talking when we were having lunch about even children watching, like Bambi's mother getting killed, or the situation with the Lion King where his father dies, and yet it's not portrayed in such a vivid way where children are pushed on that. But obviously, it is introduced. I remember when I was in school when we had to read Leo Tolstoy's Ivan Ilyich. How it was besides being a great story, it was one of those things where nobody wanted to confront the idea because they didn't want to confront the fact that him being dead is the fact that I could be dead, which we see in I'm sure we can share stories as well. When we're in a funeral home, we're doing a funeral, everybody's talking about everything but the body right there.
Right.
You're talking about baseball, jokes, the market, anything. And yet there's this body, a dead body of a person who was just alive yesterday, walking around. Here they are in a casket, and people don't want to talk about that. And then once you come to a moment of a meditation or a sermon or something, then they change their posture. But as soon as you're finished, they want to talk about something else. And so they're constantly living in this state of a state of denial.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and it's a coping mechanism. We don't want to think that that it's going to be us one day in the casket, and many people try to avoid that thought. And clearly, I think the exception to it can be when young people are faced with death. Sometimes it's almost overwhelming. Like the grief is immense. When a young person dies, or even an older person who dies, and then you see the grandchildren, they're the only ones crying there because they're not accustomed to death. They haven't lived long enough, and life tends to teach you. The older you get, the more funerals you go to, the closer you come to facing your own mortality, and it does change your perspective somewhat. Yeah.
And certainly families that have been in one way or another not exposed to it. Like myself, I've not been exposed to it simply because of the fact, personally, because of the fact that we left our country when I was 5 years old. We only have this small nucleus of family here, and none of them have died.
Okay.
So we really don't have that experience yet. But yeah, large families that your aunt, your uncles, you're all together. Certainly, it exposes you quicker to that reality. That for me is not, except for being a minister and doing funerals, I've not been exposed on a personal level to those things.
Sometimes just you remind me of a story. When I was 12 years of age, I had a cousin who we would call him ADHD today, but he was very hyper, and I remember he was killed in an accident. I was 12, he was 12. Remember being offered his clothing. He was a little bit taller than I was, and I said, no, I can't do that. I can't wear my cousin's. But I would even argue today, I probably would not be a minister, if that experience had not been a part of my childhood. It's almost like the issue of becoming face-to-face with death. And I remember a psychology class that says until someone is 12 years of age, they can't even understand the difference between dying or moving to Florida. A child says, okay, well, someone's just gone. They're just gone. But by age 12, 13, you're able to process the difference of what death makes. And I was right at that critical stage. And I remember that experience never left me. And people are dying. And people, it is important how you live. And that's been a motivator for me even to go to seminary, to prepare for ministry, and to be a pastor today. So there's and a lot of good can come out of death too. That's the other side of it.
Now, obviously, the Bible has a great deal to say about death, dying, and how to live. And Ecclesiastes, of course, is notorious as this book of a man who's consumed in that pessimism of all his vanity, and yet trying to find meaning in life. And could you elaborate upon that and tell us how does he approach life? How does he view that? And how does he view death and dying? And then I want to quote two passages
good.
here.
Yeah, no, book of Ecclesiastes, and if anyone is philosophically bent, that's a great book to read. if you like philosophy and so Solomon, the king of Israel, he's the one that writes Ecclesiastes. And basically, the argument in the early chapters is, I pursued all these different things that life had to offer. Pursued, my work. I pursued, building things. I pursued, he even talked about his harem in there.
Pleasure, man. Just say the word pleasure.
Pleasure. I drank alcohol, but my mind is...
I'm talking to like a mega conservative person here. Like, let's not say the word.
Yeah,
can I
say the word harem on TV?
You say harem. Say sex, and that'll be scandalous
okay,
right there.
Sex. Okay, anyways.
He's turning red. Look at that.
Exactly. So he pursues all these different things, and at the end of the day, he says, all is vanity. And, the ultimate, answer to life is to a relationship with God and honoring God. And if God blesses you with, with a job you can enjoy and a family you appreciate and a good night's rest, you should be thankful for that. So, but in the midst of that, there's a great passage in Ecclesiastes 7 that addresses the death issue. You want to go there?
There was two verses I wanted to quote because I recently been listening to Ecclesiastes. It said, in Ecclesiastes 7, verse 2 says, "It is better to go to a house of mourning than to a house of feasting. For death is the destiny of everyone. The living should take this to heart." And then in verse 4 it says, "The heart of the wise is in the house of mourning, but the heart of fools is in the house of pleasure." And, again, I think that people look at death incorrectly because death should make you see what is worthwhile in life. You should be able to look at death and say, I'm going to die. How should I live? What should I live for? How should I conduct myself? One of my favorite quotes is a quote said that no businessman on his deathbed said, I should have spent more time in the office. It's that moment when they realize you neglected your wife, you neglected your family, you neglected the things that were most important and most dear in life. But why should we have to wait to that moment to realize that? If we could see it now, if we could realize now, I'm going to die. How do I live? I think that will radically change us.
Yeah, I think about 9/11 when this impacted people who were making a lot of money, Lower Manhattan, obviously the World Trade Center, and there were people who lost friends there and associates, and some people just said, it's not worth it. I'm going to sell my house. I'm going to get off the rat race. I'm going to move to Colorado and live off the land or do something simple or become a school teacher because it's more meaningful, doesn't pay as well, but it's more meaningful. Whatever it was, people changed their priorities. Why? Because they were faced with the reality of death. They knew people who died. They were impacted by the sadness of 9/11, and there were changes. Most people, when they came home, they survived it, even covered in ashes. They went home and they hugged their kids because they say, what's important? It's family. And some people go back to church. Some people said, I need to revive my faith. Why? Because they were faced with death. And those are all important issues.
Well, we're going to take a small break, and after this commercial, we'll be right back.
There's no better way to start the week than to come into His presence and dedicate the rest of the week to Him.
I like the children's church downstairs because we learn a lot of new things and we have a lot of cool teachers.
We believe that church is a place that enables a person to be healthy in life, where we get to know other Christians who share our struggles and have similar concerns that we have.
And then you come together as believers, so that only enhances and pretty much strengthens your walk with the Lord. Like, you need to fellowship with other believers because that's how you grow.
You could do anything here because it's just free and you can learn about God.
You can't do it on your own, and you can't say, I'm just going to read the Bible and I'm going to stay home. Like, you need to be in fellowship.
Welcome back to Faith and Reason. You saw a clipping there from Fort Lee Gospel, and certainly if you're in the area, you should go and worship the Lord and serve God in that wonderful church. You're also welcome to come and worship and serve with us. And we're at First Baptist. We're at 777 Anderson Avenue in Cliffside Park. Our service is at 11 a.m. We also have a Wednesday night prayer meeting at 7:30 p.m. where we study the Bible as well. You can go to our Facebook or you can go to firstbaptistcp.org. You can see all the sermons, all the Bible studies, and even Faith and Reason, and get yourself involved in these things, these discussions. And today, of course, we're talking about the illusion of safety, people feeling that everything is fine, and yet we know everything is not fine. We know, of course, that bad things do happen, and they happen on a daily basis. And they may not happen to us for a long time, but eventually they will happen to us as well. One of the things I want to talk about was, dealing with tragedy. There's always this chemistry. I mean, one thing I dislike, and no offense to other Christians, I dislike when certain Christians kind of rejoice in the fact that it wasn't them, but someone else. There was a song years ago when I was a kid about, kind of feed the world type, and part of the song said, tonight, thank God it's them instead of you. Mm-hmm. And I thought, no, of course not. Mm-hmm. That's horrendous. How could I be thankful to God that it's happening in Africa or it's happening over there, but that I'm spared from it? I thought that was a horrific type of prayer. Right. But certainly, how do we deal with that? How we deal with, one family, a group of children go somewhere and X amount of families lose their 15-year-olds and X amount don't lose them, and yet they all claim faith. Mm-hmm. How do we cope with that?
Yeah, no, it's, there's a certain mystery, and when we come to death, there's never concrete answers for all the questions that arise out of it, especially with a tragedy of a younger person. I actually had a friend in Canada who was driving a car as a teenager, and he became the lone survivor. 3 others perished as he spun out of control on the ice and hit a semi coming the other way. And he had to live with that. And I got to know him shortly after the event, and attended a church where 3 families grieved the death of their teenage children. And it was very emotional. It was very difficult for a church community. But what's the answer? Is there a logical reason? Yes, the survivor, he actually, the last I knew, he was pastoring a church of 3,000 people. He was a significant leader. A part of his shaping was having to face that extremely difficult situation. And yet, how do you say that to the other families that, have a hole in their heart the rest of their life? When there is a death of a young person, it's very difficult. It can motivate good things, and frequently there's stories of, a child dies and the parents become involved in a cause, and they try to stop other children from dying in the same way if it was a disease or if it was something that's preventable in some way. But at the same time, just because there's good that comes out of it doesn't make it good that the child died. There's still an evil to that. There's still something bad about it, and so it's a real challenge.
I think you're right. We have to keep that balance, that we cannot. Sometimes the tendency of people is to look at the evil and go, "Oh, God can bring good out of it." Right. Almost like somehow the evil itself is good, and no, evil is evil. Right. It's horrendous. We know that even when Lazarus had passed away and Jesus going to a tomb, we're told that he wept. This is not part of what God intended for us. This is part of what we chose for ourselves, and we have brought evil and tragedy into this world. And and we're told to rejoice, but not at the thing, but in the midst of the thing. Right. So it's a very radical difference. Well, and that leads me to the next thing. The fact that we are going to die, the fact that all these things are happening. How can we be joyous? How can we enjoy life?
Well, the first answer from, as a minister is I say, deal with your eternal life. Deal with the fact that people live for maybe 100 years or a little bit more at best, but then you die, and faith gives answers to that. And Jesus says, "I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me will not die; he will live." And embrace that sense of faith, and from my experience and for me personally, knowing that I have a relationship with God and that when I die I go to be in the presence of God, you may say, well, that's wishful thinking or that's my faith. It may be, but it helps me live life. It gives me confidence. It means that, I'm going, on a trip fairly soon that could be seen as dangerous in some regards, going to the Middle East. And yet, I don't have to be afraid of that. Why? Because worst case scenario, I don't come back, I'm in a better place. And that's what I believe, that's what I teach, that's what I understand. So now I'm not looking forward to going there and not coming back, that's not my point. But the first place to joy is when you feel at peace with God. And even that belief, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He will, know what is right for me. And if what's right for me is to live another 50 years, I'll take it. Yeah. And if it's another 2 years, it is what it is. So, and eternal life is better. So that's the first part, is dealing with your understanding of the afterlife. And the Bible addresses that, and Jesus died and rose again as the central issue of Christianity. He rose that we might rise after we die as well. Mm-hmm. And that's the whole Easter story.
Yeah. For me, there's two things definitely in mind. First of all is that, those who would mock our faith have no better alternative.
True.
That, I've been in discussion with atheists who try to make it sound like there can be meaning and purpose without God. Mm-hmm. The fact is that there is no God, there is no ultimate meaning, there's no ultimate purpose. It's only what you create. It's your illusion. Mm-hmm. And when you die, that illusion dies with you. Mm-hmm. I remember a while back I had read a book by Jerry Walls that we've actually discussed here a number of times, called Good God. And I really would recommend every Christian should read that book. But one of the things I loved about it was this one passage where he said, when a tragedy occurs, let's say, what happened in Connecticut, these children are killed, this horrible thing happens. Nobody ever goes and asks an atheist, hey, what would you say to those parents? Mm. They always go to the rabbi, they always go to the priest, they go to the minister. Mm-hmm. They never go to an atheist and say, what would you tell these parents who have now lost their kids? Because you have no message of hope for them. Mm-hmm. There is nothing. All you can say is, well, nature decided to eliminate them. Mm-hmm. What are you going to say to them? Nothing. Right. And that's the first thing. Second thing I always think about is that we always confuse, and this I'm very grateful to Augustine in this sense. Those of us who are philosophically minded. Besides Ecclesiastes, I'm grateful to Augustine, because Augustine taught me to look at what is good, but what is the greatest good. Mm. And the greatest good is to know God in this life and to enjoy Him in the afterlife. Mm. That is the greatest good. Mm-hmm. Outside of that, nothing is great. That's why, Jesus said, what does a man gain if he gains the whole world, yet loses his soul? Right. He's gained nothing. He loses everything. Mm-hmm. So our perspective should be, if you know the Lord, then you can enjoy everything that God has given to us. Like we can see that all these things are the beauty of God's creation. Mm-hmm. Enjoy them while you have them, but don't hold on to them like they're eternal.
Right.
And what you will have in the afterlife, it will be appropriate to that existence and enjoyable within that existence. Mm-hmm. So I think that, again, those things help me to realize, come on, there is a great joy in living that we can have.
Yes, absolutely.
You had a point to make?
No, go ahead.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Well, I guess we kind of answered this one, so maybe we'll go to the next one. My next question was, how does belief in heaven make a difference? But let's touch the last one first. How does prayer help? And I know you want to share something with us. You have Philippians 4, verses 5 and 6.
Yeah,
how does prayer help in dealing with death and all these situations?
Yeah. Philippians 4 says, do not be anxious about anything, but in everything by prayer and petition with thanksgiving, present your request to God. Amen. And the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and minds in Christ Jesus. So, a verse like that really points out that, and let me put it back into context. You can be watching the news and become very anxious. Somebody gets murdered over there, there's a car accident over there, there's a fire over there, there's a terrorist attack somewhere else. And human nature says, that could be me, or that could be my family member, and you can get very anxious. I think prayer is very important to to bring our worries, our concerns to God. Prayer is many things. It's developing a relationship with God. It's talking to God. Yes, there are written prayers that may be helpful in some ways. Some people say the Our Father regularly, the prayer that Jesus taught his disciples. Our Father which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. And that's a very common prayer. But I think beyond that, and what is really a big part of our tradition is saying, we can talk to God every day. You don't have to go to church to pray. You don't have to be in a Bible study or with other people to pray. But really, every follower of Christ should spend a few minutes every day, beginning their day with prayer and maybe Bible reading, maybe a devotional thought. Those kind of things. It really does a lot to bring peace and joy into your life. And this life has a lot of craziness to it, and we may be far removed, and there may be a season where we go through, as Psalm 23 says, the valley of the shadow of death. We go through those experiences where we have a loss or we have a grief that we have to face, but ultimately the importance of prayer, and from my experience as a minister, almost no one says, I don't want your prayer. I mean, sometimes people joke, oh, say a prayer for me, or say a prayer for him, he really needs it, that kind of thing, just in banter. But people appreciate being prayed for. But again, it's not just for the professionals, if I can call us professional prayers, but all of us can pray, and it does a lot to bring a sense of peace and deal with the anxieties and being afraid of the future,
And I think with prayer, one thing we can learn from the Psalms is the importance of honesty in prayer. I think that you see the psalmists having all their grieving, all their pain. Oh God, where are you? Why have you abandoned me? Don't you care? Don't you? And I always tell people there's nothing wrong in praying that way, because you're still talking to God.
Right.
The worst prayer is when you're not praying because you don't want to talk to Him. You're denying Him.
Right.
But when you're actually even arguing with Him, you're still in dialogue. You're still trying to figure out why God, why did this happen? Even if it's not revealed to you, at least you're trying to discover it. And some people, some Christians shy away from that because they want almost like this kind of purified type prayer, sanitized, that you don't dare question, you don't dare. And yet the Bible is open where you see a lot of people praying in agony to God and saying, why am I going through this?
And really the heart of Christianity is that there was a God, and I'll even take us back into the Garden of Eden. There was a God who created this earth and placed Adam and Eve in the garden, whether it's, however you want to view that. But in the midst of that, God wanted to commune with Adam and Eve. He wanted a relationship with them. He wanted them to talk to Him, and that's the God that we worship and serve.
Well, we're very grateful that you spent this evening with us, and certainly we want to make you aware of the topic, but not simply the illusion of safety, but certainly the greatness of the presence of God, who has made Himself very tangible for us. And we pray that you'll search Him out, and definitely in prayer and in service to Him. God bless you. Have a good evening.
Thank you for watching Faith and Reason. Please join us again next week. We invite you to visit our pastors at one of their churches, Pastor Rick Spence at Fort Lee Gospel Church, or Pastor George Crespo at the First Baptist Church in Cliffside Park. Check out our websites for more information.